Well, hello, everybody. Good evening and a very happy. I don't know, what are we in? Saturday now? I think it's Saturday. Happy Saturday to all of you. Glad to have you here with us tonight as we dive in for another night of story time. Tonight we continue our story of Cal, Ovette, Artie, Jord, and the Gifted. Ah, the Gifted. What does it mean to be a gifted? Are you a gifted? If you are, why? If you're not, why not? Okay, so none of us are gifted. We're not magic users. Last I checked. I mean, maybe you guys are, but I'm not. And so, very happy to have you here with me as we continue to explore into the world here and find out what happens next. Cal and Ovette are back together again. I wish I were 18 again, going where I've never been. Um, it is very nice. Oh yes, it is very nice. Um, so they, you know, basically Cal and Ovette and all of their people, the rebellion has been quashed in Eunice. And now it is time for them all to move along to another place to be. Um, and so they are all moving along to, I don't know, somewhere else. Some other city that they will go and explore. Hopefully to be in a somewhat safe situation for them. Um, and Cal is back with Ovette. Ovette was basically, what do we want to say? Do we want to say captured? Do we want to say claimed? Do we want to say, what exactly do we want to say about how Ovette is back with all of the group? Maybe it's just she was attached to the chain. She was saved from being attacked by the chain by Cal, and Cal was taken in by Dredge, and Dredge saved Cal and Ovette and Shay. And because of that being saved, they basically captured Ovette. Ovette says that she hates Cal. She ends up breaking out of the dungeon where they were keeping her. And it doesn't matter because um, basically Ovette has been targeted by the the prefects, and they have said that she is a bad, bad girl, and that she was part of the resistance, and so because of that, they are coming to get her just the same as they were getting the rest of everybody. And so when she does escape, she goes to the prefects and says, "Help! Help me! Help me! Oh my God, help me!" And they say, "Yup, nope, we're taking you with us." And because she was attacked, they basically Cal stops in and saves her and all the rest of that. And so because he saved her, Yoshi is a little bit nicer towards him, maybe. Maybe still hates him. And so now they will be so that they basically with Dredge's help, they are going to be escaping this on a boat, went down a river. They went down yonder on the Chattahoochee, never knew how much that muddy water meant to me. But I learned how to swim and I learned who I was. A lot about living and a little about love. Um, and so they were going down river and then supposed to be taking an airship or something to go and find hopefully another resistance area where Jord was going to, and ideally living free and getting to safety. We don't know that that's what's going to happen. We can just hope that that's what's going to happen for them. And so that is where we will pick it up tonight. Of course, you can join in to chat with myself or others in the community across multiple different platforms. Right now, we are streaming live on Twitch, YouTube, Kick, X, everywhere that is nice in your hearts, that you know you wanted to be, where you knew you wanted to be. And so sit back, everyone, relax, and prepare to enjoy as we dive into this next reading of Gyfted. We'll be starting on chapter 26. And just a reminder, if you didn't happen to know already, youtube.com/@SirArminius is where you can grab all of the previous chapters of Gyfted, as well as the chapters of other books that I have read. We've read a variety of things, some indie authors, some more well-known authors, some maybe less well-known authors from decades, all out there for your listening enjoyment. You don't have to pay a dime. I would love a subscription, though. That would be nice. They're free on YouTube. All right, everybody. I record all of these as the reminder. So, with the recordings going, there is that reminder to you that because they are being recorded, I will not be engaging with the chat during the chapter reads, but I will engage between chapters. So, here we go, everyone. Let's dive right into Gyfted by D.W. Lewis, starting in 26. Cal scanned the few people mingling on the docks as he stepped off the boat. No sign of Dredge's contact. Not that he had any idea who to look for. He'd hoped someone would be there to meet them as they disembarked, but no such luck. A few of the workers glanced his way before returning to their task at hand. Gale's End was new territory, a trading post that housed both a sea and an air dock, a commercial hub for anyone wanting to do business on the continent. Buildings, drab and utilitarian, lined the dockside, making it difficult to see further into the city. The scent of salt and oil hung in the air, along with the horns and thrums of the ships waiting in port. Beyond the docks, rooftops and towers varied in color and design, a jumbled clash of Undian and Valan culture. A skyline built for function rather than to represent a unified vision. Shay led them through the docks, ducking into a warehouse to avoid the main thoroughfare. Crates and barrels occupied most of the storage space, branded with various trading house insignias. A mix of lantern and natural light made it easy enough to pass through, but they also carved deep pockets of shadow. Cal's fingers itched for the blade shard each time they drew close. Emerging back into the street, Shay made for a nearby tavern, its noise spilling out as she pushed open its door. Warmth and the stench of merriment and ale washed over Cal. Dock workers packed the room, clustered around squat tables, all in the midst of conversation and typical after work rituals. Any sign of our guy? Cal asked. Shay scanned the crowd and then tapped Cal on the shoulder, nodding toward a large bar situated at the back. I'll go ask. Cal didn't love the idea of splitting up amidst this chaos, but Ovette's hunched shoulders and darting eyeline told him enough about how uncomfortable she was in the din. He steered her toward a table tucked in the corner. It didn't give a great view of the immediate space, and it wasn't close to the exit, but at least the crowd of drunks made it around it offered some secrecy. One such drunk lay slumped across the table, snoring into his clutched bottle. Ovette hesitated, then slid into the chair opposite him, keeping her movements quiet. Cal dropped into the seat beside the drunk with far less grace. The man mumbled something incoherent, but didn't wake. I don't like it here, Ovette said, eyes still locked on their sleeping table companion. We should leave as soon as possible. Cal studied the room, noting the different groups of people around him. He was unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. I know this place isn't exactly what you're used to, but... Ovette shook her head. No, it's not that. She clenched and unclenched her fists. Something is coming. You can feel it too, can't you? Shay popped down next to them before Cal could respond. She took the bottle out of the sleeping drunk's hand and took a long swig. No luck. Seems no one has seen or heard from any of Dredge's people in a few days. Cal's lips pressed into a line. Dredge told us someone would be here. I don't know, Shay shrugged. Maybe he lied to us. Wouldn't put it past him. Probably tipped off the Davins already. Shay emptied the bottle and returned it to its original owner's sleepy grasp. Cal thought about what Dredge had said, about the seriousness with which he spoke of his reputation. As much of a scumbag as Dredge was, selling them out made no sense. Well, what do we do now? Ovette eyed Shay with the same caution she'd afforded everyone else in the tavern. Shay, either not noticing or not caring, ignored the look. Unless we can figure out another way of getting onto an airship, there isn't much we can do. A glass crossed the tavern. Ovette flinched, her gaze darting through the crowd. We can't stay here. We need to keep moving. The chain knows where I am. The chain in Valewind? Cal asked. Ovette returned her attention to the table and shook her head. No, not that one. The one housed in Sanctum Spire. The Great Chain. Shay leaned in, her curiosity piqued. How does a chain know where you are? I was kept at Sanctum Spire for a while after Igni. Ovette's eyes flicked to Cal, who lowered his. I never actually saw the chain. Cius would never let me anywhere near the Sanctum's chain room. Cius, huh? Shay cocked her eyebrow. Ovette placed her hand against her chest, closed her eyes, and breathed. It was at Sanctum that Cius first taught me about what it meant to be the gifted, where I started to learn about my abilities. But the more I learned, the more I felt the great chain watching me. A hum buzzed in the back of Cal's head, distant and close at the same time. It watched you? Shay frowned. Are the chains alive? Ovette shook her head, but kept her gaze on Cal. No, not alive. Not really. They're more like a constant presence. Whispers and humming in the back of your mind. Eyes that are always watching you. Pressure throbbed behind Cal's eyes. Cold squirmed beneath his skin. He blinked against the blur that crept into his vision. Ovette sounded as if she were talking through a thick wall. The tavern's noise dulled, replaced by a hum that swelled into a piercing whine. The whispers latched onto his thoughts, icy fingers tightening. Ugh! He jerked forward, his eyes squeezed shut as the whispering grew louder and louder. A hand gripped his shoulder, its owner's voice muffled, drowned out by the thump, thump, thump of the voices in his head. Cal! Ovette's voice pierced through the noise, like a cleansing warmth that flooded his veins, pushing back the cold. I'm all right, Cal said, sweat slick on his palms. She stared at him, her skin pale. Her eyes flicked down for a second and then back up. Cal, you're bleeding. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. The blood was pockmarked with tiny black spots. It's nothing, Cal said, not believing his own words. I'm fine, a familiar voice drew near. It is good to know some people never change. Cal's eyes widened as Quentin slid into the table's only empty seat, a fresh bottle and 4 cups in hand. He took his time setting the cups out in front of everybody, but only Ovette accepted the drink he poured, though she set it aside after a glance at Cal and Shay. Cal's glare could have melted steel. You all look like you've seen a ghost, Quentin said, smirking and taking a sip of his wine. What are you doing here? Shay asked, her voice flat. Currently, I'm trying to enjoy a drink with old friends. Been rather boring waiting for you all to arrive. He gulped down the contents of his cup and proceeded to pour himself another. Cal's hand shifted toward the blade shard. How did you know we'd be here? Quentin cocked his head in surprise, looking as if Cal had just asked a stupid question. Dredge sent me, of course. You're our... Shay shifted in her seat, one hand on the table, the other resting in her lap. Dredge never mentioned it was you, Cal added. That's odd, Quentin said. I started working for the man not long after leaving you and Jord. His gaze swept the table and then the rest of the room. Jord is not here, I take it. No, we're to meet him in Valewind, Shay said. Dredge not tell you? Cal said. Quentin balked at Cal's gaze. I wasn't privy to the details of the job. Just told to meet you here. Can't blame me if I hoped Jord would be among you. His gaze shifted to Ovette, his smile following suit. My, it seems you've picked up a stray. And a beautiful one at that. He took her hand, kissing her fingers. And, dear, would your... Ovette. She didn't pull away, her expression unreadable. A beautiful name for such a beautiful maiden. Quentin's thumb traced her knuckles. It occurred to Cal that this probably wasn't the first time Ovette had had to deal with suitors or noblemen fawning for her affection, showering her with honeyed words and compliments in a bid to gain her favor. Still, Cal's jaw tightened, but he forced his voice neutral. Have you figured out a way for us to get into Valewind? Why, of course, Quentin replied, letting go of Ovette's hand, but not before shooting Cal a sidelong glance. First class on the next luxury airship that just so happens to be leaving tomorrow morning. First class? How did you manage that? Shay asked. Quentin's smile widened as he produced 4 golden-edged tickets from his coat. A silver tongue can get you anywhere. He tossed them onto the table, the tickets penned with the usual embellishments about the smoothest ride a customer could ever dream of. Cal caught one mid slide. His stomach dropped as he studied the ticket's contents. You used our real names? He snatched up the other tickets. Shay's name, Ovette's name, all ready for any prefect to see. Quentin rolled his eyes, all nonchalance and full of himself. You worry too much, Cal. The right palms have been sufficiently greased. As long as you don't plan on murdering the whole crew due to ideological differences, we are very much in the clear. We? Quentin threw up his hands and slammed them down on the table, waking the drunk, who proceeded to stumble his way over to the bar. You are insufferable. He stood, offering Ovette his arm. Miss Ovette, might you assist me with procuring us a room or two for the night? She glanced at Cal before accepting Quentin's outstretched hand with more grace than the scoundrel deserved. Certainly. Shay leaned across and tapped her finger on the table. Hey, you okay? Cal tracked Quentin before answering, making sure he was out of earshot. Something's off. Why wouldn't Dredge tell us we were meeting Quentin? And how long has he been waiting for us? Shay followed his gaze. She smiled and jerked her head up as Quentin waved back at them. Who knows what Dredge is thinking at any time? Maybe we just take this one as it is. We're due for some good luck, I'd say. He filled out our names on the tickets. Cal turned to Shay. All our names. Shay let out a long sigh. Yeah, I noticed that too. Cal lowered his voice. Keep an eye on him, will you? We're too close for anything to go wrong now. Shay nodded as Quentin and Ovette began walking back, the former mid-story, the latter feigning polite interest. Cal's fingers found the hilt of the blade shard, and the hum in his head grew louder. Daven airships came in all shapes and sizes, from the bulky merchant vessels that chugged goods from skyport to skyport, to the luxury airliners that glided through the clouds. Cal had never boarded one, let alone one that bore the gilt and velvet of a luxury estate. Voices rang through the crowded nobles as they politely jostled up the airship ramp, each group spouting self-importance and the marvels of modern Daven engineering. Above Cal, the airship's hull stretched long and cylindrical, pure white with cobalt swirls accenting the gold plating that connected the various rungs and girders of the craft together. A massive fin curved from bow to stern, and it too was etched with the same ornate patterns. Even the boarding platform consisted of lacquered wood polished to a shine. Cal ignored the crowd. His head still throbbed as Quentin insisted on everyone joining him at the foredeck. Instead, he headed for the passenger quarters located at the rear. A flash of his ticket was enough to get him past the guards placed at either side of the airship's innards. Their cabin matched the affluence of the rest of the airship. Plush red cushions atop expensive-looking furniture, gold filigree running through every possible surface, a thick rug swallowing the floorboards. He cared little for the finery, but the cabin, adorned with its cushioned nooks and shared communal space, tugged at a memory. The hideout he'd once shared with Ovette in Igni. The briefest of smiles crossed his lips as he mused over which cushion Ovette would claim. His smile died as he realized this new Ovette might not care for such things anymore. She wasn't the girl he'd lost all those years ago. something that was becoming more and more apparent the longer he spent with her. The whispering hummed in his head, making it difficult to collect his thoughts. As he shook his head, he could feel something writhing beneath his skin. Not pain exactly, but the slight of movement where there should be none. Cal moved to the standing mirror and braced himself. He hesitated as he pulled back his collar. The blackness that had taken his left arm had spread. Where it had once stopped near his shoulder, inky black tendrils now climbed along his upper torso and his neck, pulsing just beneath the surface of his skin. Each sickening squirm sent pinpricks through his flesh. The door to the private cabin creaked open. "Cal, are you in here?" Cal readjusted his collar and turned to face Ovette, who stood in the doorway, fingers curled around the handle. "How do you feel?" she asked, her gaze lingering on his arm. "Fine, just not a big fan of crowds," Cal replied, not looking her in the eye. She shut the door and drifted toward the cushions, smiling as she inspected the plushness on offer. Settling herself down, she bunched a few together and nestled one Cal assumed to be her instant favorite across her lap. A sliver of warmth flickered in Cal's chest. "How's the arm?" She nodded to his left side. "Hurts?" He flexed his blackened fingers, pushing away thoughts of the squirming tendrils at his neck. "Can't really feel anything in it." "Does it scare you?" "Not really." He made a fist. "Doesn't really seem to be anything I can do about it. As long as I can still use it, that's all that matters to me." Ovette chuckled. "Still terrible at lying." The silence between them stretched. Cal took a seat at the table, the warmth in his chest fading, replaced by something restless. "Have you decided what you're going to do when we get to Valewind?" He kept his eyes on the rug. "No, not yet." She picked at a tassel. "I was thinking I could stick around a little longer, if that's okay with you." "What? With a bunch of thugs and killers?" He forced a laugh, but regretted the words as soon as they left his mouth. Ovette shrank deeper into the cushions, not looking in Cal's direction. "Sorry," he added. "Bad joke." The silence thickened. Cal's cheeks burned and he dropped his chin to his chest. Why was this so hard? They'd been family once. The burning in his cheeks tingled at the thought of never being family again. The cushions rustled as Ovette stood, and Cal couldn't help but watch her as she slowly made her way across the room. Not fleeing, but not staying either. She stopped just short of the door. "Gifted? I still want to help the people," she said, not turning to face Cal. "Yuden or Davin, I don't care. I just want to help. To make their lives easier somehow. Find a way for us both to coexist." "What about the Lord Inquisitor?" Cal rose as well. "He wants you dead." "I don't know. I'll help you. Whatever you need me to do." His voice trembled as he tried to get the words out. "Just like old times." Ovette dipped her head. "It won't, Cal." She opened the door and stepped through the archway. "But maybe that's not such a bad thing." The whispers rushed back first, flooding his mind like an irritating itch. Then the pinpricks beneath his skin began again in earnest. Both had been quieter in Ovette's presence. "Progress," he muttered to an empty room, glancing at Ovette's cushion arrangement. He followed her into the corridor, the hum in his skull swelling with each step. The main deck reminded Cal of the matriarch's gala. He pushed through a crowd of impractical gowns and tailor-trimmed suits, his courtesy strained by his exhaustion and general temperament. Hiding in plain sight like this still felt foreign, like speaking a language he'd never learned. There you are! Quentin threw his arm around Cal's shoulders, dragging him over to a small table at the deck's edge. We've been missing you. Below, Eudos lay bare for all to see. The mouth of the veil stabbed the sky, their canyons whipped by winds visible even from this height. Veilwind's chain punctured a hole through the never-ending storm, creating the only known safe passage through the Veil's Gate. A line of airships, minuscule against the grandeur of the chain's links, queued on either side. Cal, it heartens me greatly to be returned to your side, Quentin bellowed as they meandered closer toward Shay and Ovette. Do you have to be so loud? Cal scanned nearby faces for any eavesdroppers. Quentin, energized by the apparent audience, spun and lifted his arms high and wide. How can I not be? Do you not see this view? The sweeping arches of glorious Eudos, the glisten of the water below. It would be a crime not to shout its majesty. His laugh rang across the deck. Cal's shoulders tightened. This performance would draw unwanted attention. Quentin, undeterred by the odd stare, pulled him in close again. Too close. These are my people, Cal. Trust me. The more you try to hide among them, the easier you are to be spotted, he muttered. Cal broke free, dropping into a seat between Shay and Ovette. Quentin took the chair opposite. What is there to be so dour about? We're sitting comfortably on one of the finest airships in the Empire. We have food aplenty. Quentin gestured to the spread laid out on the table. Fruit, cheeses, fresh bread, jugs containing wines and juices. He swept a hand toward the crowd. And these peacocks are too occupied with themselves to give two shits about us. Learn to enjoy the finer things in life, my boy. Cal turned his head to look at Shay, who answered with an eye roll. Mr. Quentin here has a point. Ovette leaned forward and filled a full glass. Wine or juice, Cal couldn't tell. In fact, he had no name for half the dishes spread out in front of him. I attended several galas and festivals during my time with Lord Cius. He told me early on that the only thing the other attendees cared about was themselves and how to further enhance their positions within the Empire. She took a sip from her glass and winced as she swallowed. Even if someone were to overhear us here, without direct proof, they'd stand more to lose than they were to gain. Finally, someone with sense and an ounce of decorum. Quentin kissed Ovette's fingers. For the second time. If only we'd met sooner. What wonders we might have shared together. In crawled. His jaw twitched. Shay cleared her throat. Would that have been before or after you met Jord? Quentin laughed, releasing Ovette's hand as he leaned back in his chair. My commitment to our merchant prince is unwavering. My heart belongs to him, and to him alone. He returned his gaze to Ovette and gave her a subtle wink. But there's no harm in a little fun along the way, huh? Ovette smiled back and wiped her thumb over the kissed spot, turning her attention to Cal and Shay. You mentioned Jord. Is he still alive? Shay responded. He is. He's who we need to find in Valewind, Cal added, uncurling his fists. Jord, Artie, and a handful of others. They're all that's left of the Yundis rebellion cell. Ovette didn't reply, but her eyes softened, and the corners of her mouth curled into a smile. A crackle emanated from several of the deck's wall-mounted speakers, soon followed by the stern voice of the airship captain. Despite his physical absence, his voice alone was enough to cut through the deck's chatter. Attention! All passengers must return to their cabins during the passing through the Veil's Gate. The announcement repeated as the passengers occupying the deck made their way back inside. Compliments about the handsomeness of the captain or reassurances of the airship's sturdiness filling the air. Cal stood with the others to join the queue, turning one last time to take a look at the approaching chain. The whispered itch in his head sharpened, pushing into his skull as if his head were caught in a vice. His vision blurred, his balance faltered, and he stumbled forward, upending the table and its contents. The noisy clatter of plates drew the attention of the nearby crowd. Shay and Ovette each looped an arm under Cal and dragged him back inside as Quentin spun excuses. Sour wine, first time on an airship, to the groups they passed in the corridors. The glare from the light fixtures burned Cal's eyes, and he held up his hand to shield them. The barked orders of the airship guards and the corridor stragglers who huffed at the indignation of being told what to do came through muffled. As another announcement informed everyone that they were approaching the chain, fire lanced through the inky veins in Cal's arm. He collapsed onto the bed, gripping his left arm, his hand twitching. It jerked back and forth, his bones cracking, his fingers twisting at unnatural. If not for the constant pounding in his skull, the pain would have caused him to black out. Ovette hauled him upright. She placed one arm around him and enfolded his blackened hand in hers. Warmth spread from her palms, seeping into his skin. Rage surged within Cal, and he clamped his blackened fingers around her forearm. She winced but didn't let go, instead reaching under his shirt and placing the tattered old coin pouch in his free hand. Focus on my voice, she whispered, her voice coming clear and strong, despite the chorus of screams in his ears. Her warmth pushed deeper. His head threatened to split open. Outside, a guard could be heard knocking on the other passengers' doors and asking for their tickets. Bad timing. Shay jerked her chin at Quentin. You deal with the guard, and I'll do something about them. A shadow rippled from her brand before she'd finished speaking, and with a flick of her wrist, she draped it over the bed. Cal's form shimmered into an old man hunched in pain, Ovette, his dutiful wife, steadying him. The illusion was thin, but it might fool a glance. Or a fool. Quentin swung the cabin door open mid-knock, surprising the guard outside, who took a second to compose himself before speaking. I'm to inform you that we'll be passing through the chain momentarily. Now, if you could just show me your tickets, I can be on my way. Of course, Quentin replied, producing 4 tickets from the inside of his jacket. Here you go. The guard checked each ticket as he spoke. What business do you have in Valewind, Mr. Delrell? Quentin Delrell. Mm-hmm. The guard checked the ticket information against a small clipboard. And your business? Seeing. The family and I are worried about the current state of the Empire. I'm originally from the Vale, you see, and I thought the best time to do a spot of traveling before borders are closed. Sightseeing, you say? That's correct. The guard eyed Quentin for a few moments. A little strange to sightsee in your own homeland, don't you think, Mr. Delrell? Quentin's posture stiffened. Oh, uh, the scene portion of the trip is for my dear wife Shay. Quentin gestured to Shay. She's Indian, never traveled before, the poor thing. The guard stepped inside, his suspicion lingering on the shadow-changed forms of Cal and Ovette. We've had reports of 4 suspicious individuals boarding the airship. 2 males, 2 females, all around the same age. He turned back to Quentin. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Mr. Delrell? Not at all, but I have the utmost faith that you and your diligent colleagues will track them down. Quentin's smile strained. Well, you and your family be careful in Valewind, Mr. Delrell. The city is in a state of turmoil at the moment. The rebel attacks on the citadel are a daily occurrence now. Best you and your family move on as soon as possible. The guard continued, his tone lacking the suspicion it held earlier. I thank you for the sound advice, and for your continued service, Quentin replied, dropping into a quick bow. The guard scoffed to himself and turned to walk to the next cabin, the sound of his knocking on that door coming through moments later. Shay breathed a heavy sigh of relief and dropped her illusion. A shadow cast from the gigantic chain link outside crept across the room, a shadow that pulsed a sickly green. As Cal stared at the chain through the cabin window, the voice in his head roared in an alien tongue. The slow rumble of each word conveyed its excitement, its anticipation. The inky tendrils squirmed, twisting deeper into his flesh, sending fire rushing up his neck. He gripped the coin pouch tighter, digging his fingers into the weathered cloth, as if it were the only thing keeping him sane. Keeping him. The shadow passed, the green glow dimmed, and the voice receded to a whisper once more. The burning weight that had pushed down on his body gave way to ragged breathing. Drenched in sweat, he shivered and dropped the coin pouch to the floor. He felt drained, as if his life had just been siphoned from him. Cal, let go. Ovette's voice cut through the dull ring in his ears. What? He replied. He looked down. His blackened fingers were still digging into her forearm, blood beading where his nails had broken the skin. He jerked his hand away. I'm sorry. I didn't. She placed her hand on his shoulder and squeezed. Shay's eyes widened. Cal, what just happened? I have no idea, he replied, too tired to try to convince her it was nothing to worry about. Whenever the voice in my head gets louder, things get fuzzy for me. It's difficult to describe. Voice in your... Shay asked. Whose voice? I don't know, Shay. I don't recognize the language, but there's a feeling there. Pain, excitement, anger. Like it wants something from me, or wants me to do something. Cal glanced down at Ovette's forearm, at the scratch marks left by his fingers. Ovette covered her scratches, her soft smile only making Cal feel worse. Ovette, do you hear it too? Shay asked. Ovette shook her head, not looking at Shay as she responded. No, not hear it. More like feel it. A presence or a pressure that's here, but not here. Here but not here? How delightfully clear. Quentin muttered, throwing his hands up in the air and taking a seat at the room's dining table. It's difficult to explain. As a child, I had constant headaches, and after connecting to Igny's chain, those headaches became more like a scratching at the back of my mind. Shay frowned. You mentioned the great chain in Sanctum Spire knows where you are, or can tell where you are. If I use my gift, yes. Did you use it on me? Cal asked, his vision coming back into focus. Just now? Yes, Ovette replied. I had to. Cal opened his mouth to reply, but another announcement from the small speaker in the room cut him off. Attention all passengers. We shall be docking at Valewind shortly. All passengers are to have their travel documents ready for further inspection upon arrival. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention. The speaker crackled as the announcement faded, soon replaced by the airship jolting for a second time. Perhaps this conversation is better saved for a locale that contains more learned participants. That boy Artemis springs to mind, Quentin said, draining the last from a cup. Agreed, Shay added. She collected what little the group had brought on board and then followed Quentin out of the room. Ovette held her hand out toward Cal. It's going to get worse, isn't it? Cal asked, staring back at her. Yes, it will. Cal paused. His lip quivered as he searched for the courage to ask the next question. Will it kill me? Eventually, Ovette replied. Cal didn't know what to say. What was there to say to something like that? This inevitability felt unbearable. A loss of control. Like every step forward pushed him 2 steps back. Ovette stood for a moment longer, her attention turned away from him, glancing at everything and nothing. Her lips parted, but all that came was a reserved sigh. And then, with slow, deliberate movement, she turned and made, leaving Cal alone with his thoughts. Cal exhaled, clasping his hands together and dropping his head. His eyes fell on Ovette's coin pouch. After a few moments of staring, he scooped it up and tied it back onto the string around his neck. Outside, Valewind's chain loomed, growing smaller and smaller as the airship pulled away, but not far enough for the whispers to stay silent. As they gathered again, Cal held the coin pouch around his neck. He wasn't powerless yet, for now his mind was still his own. He thought back to his earlier conversation with Ovette. He hadn't lied to her, not fully. If he could still use his arm, if his body still obeyed his will, then that was enough, for now. Cal's eyes narrowed. He couldn't accept the thought of losing himself, of succumbing to the corruption in his body. His face settled into grim determination, and he muttered to himself, Then I'll just have to kill it first. The end of chapter 26. Hello, everyone. How are you all tonight? Tonight, tonight, tonight. Whoa. We're gonna make it right. Tonight, tonight, tonight. Whoa, whoa. I hope you guys are enjoying the story. Having fun here with me. Listening. So strong. So deep. So loving. So everything. As a reminder, if you have missed any part of the book so far, or if you have missed any of tonight's reading, you can always stop out and listen in to the previous chapters at youtube.com/@SirArminius. Tonight's chapters will be posted immediately after the stream, so hopefully they will be up there and ready when you guys are ready to listen to them. But until then, let's keep on reading, shall we? As we dive into our next chapter, we'll move into 27. Valewind was a city unlike anything Cal had seen before. Its walls towered over him as he disembarked the airship and joined the checkpoint queue, a sheer black stone buttress that surrounded the city, keeping the building safe from the relentless torrent of the Vale's wind that even now roared behind him. Like teeth on a gear cog, it jutted out into the valley at several intervals, edges smoothed from years of relentless service. Ahead, underneath an enormous archway that served as entry for both passengers seeking to enter the city proper and airships looking to make berth, stood a full complement of prefects, sashes of green and brown running shoulder to hip across their silver armor. They barked orders at crew members returning home after a long voyage, and nobles who typically held themselves above the concerns of a lowly prefect. "Do you think we're going to be able to get through?" Obed asked the group. As subtly as she could, she pointed to a poster hanging on the wall inside the checkpoint. 3 familiar faces stared back. Cal turned to Quentin. "Can you get us through?" Quentin looked past Cal at the prefects manning the checkpoint and then back at him. His expression shifted, settling on one that made it obvious what he thought of Cal's question. "Sneaking through isn't really my forte." He gestured to Cal and Shay and then waved his hands toward the checkpoint. "Can't you two stab your way through?" Shay shook her head, lowering her voice enough that only the others could hear her. "Too many people. Too open. Could turn ugly fast. We need a subtler way through." Ovette tapped Shay on the shoulder and pointed toward the front of the queue. Something's happening." At the front of the queue, a nobleman in a Yundian robe, with its blended shades of blue and white silk meant to represent the ever-constant waves of the Yundish shoreline, showed a document at a prefect. The red of his cheeks grew brighter with each outburst, in stark contrast to the granite-like scowl of the prefect. "Don't you know who I am? I am a member of the Select Council. How dare you order me around like some common hollowborn? If I were you, I'd—" The man jolted as the prefect, fed up with this charade, barked his interruption. "All passengers are subject to inspection. The city of Valewind is under strict curfew by order of Lord Inquisitor Seus himself. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention." The prefect stepped forward, his sheer presence sapping some of the nobleman's bluster. "I shall not repeat myself again. Present your documents for inspection." "Now's our chance. While everyone is distracted, move up," Shay whispered. Cal grabbed Ovette's wrist and wove through the crowd. Most of the people were too enamored by the commotion ahead to notice anyone slipping by them. The nobleman stood in stunned silence for a moment. The red in his cheeks waned for a brief second, likely since he'd never been spoken to in such a manner before. For a moment, it looked as though he might comply. But then he reached for the prefect's shoulder, only to be forced to knock the wind out of him. His companion shrieked as 2 other prefects hauled her and the nobleman into a nearby room. The door slammed shut, leaving only raised voices and grunting to fuel the imagination. "Quentin, Cal whispered. You're up. Charm your way through. What? Me? Quentin replied, his tone a pitch higher than normal. Yes, go. Cal shoved him to the front. The remaining prefect barked, his eyes locked solely on Quentin. With a nervous cough, Quentin stepped forward. Ah, terrible business that. May we pass? His tone was still a pitch too high. Documents and business within the city. The prefect held out his hand toward Quentin. Ah, yes, of course. Here you are. Quentin reached inside his jacket and dropped the documents into the gauntleted hand of the prefect, as well as a small pile of coins. I trust everything is in order. The prefect closed his hand on the coin, placing them and the group's travel documents into a small pouch without taking so much as a second glance at them. We might need those. Why? In the city so soon? The prefect's hand shifted to a dagger at his belt. Uh, no, Quentin stammered. We'll be in the city for a good time. Good. I think I'll hold on to them for you. Seek me out when you want to leave, and we'll have another conversation about how you can earn them back. The prefect jerked his thumb to the right, in the direction of a large staircase that looked as though it led into the city. Now move. Quentin took a deep breath and then bowed his head. You are a gentleman beyond reproach, sir. The prefect didn't reply, but took the time to check the faces of everyone. As Cal passed, the prefect's arm shot out, grabbing his shoulder. He squinted as he stepped closer to Cal. You look familiar. The door to the side room slammed open, and one of the earlier prefects stepped out. This gate is closed for summary. All remaining passengers are to line up against the wall, now. The prefect jerked his head toward the stairwell before joining his colleague in rounding up the unlucky crew members and passengers that remained. Not wasting a second, Cal and the others hurried up the stairwell and entered the city of Valewind. Inside the confines of Valewind's outer wall, the city looked very different than it had from the air. The city was split into 3 rings stacked on top of one another, with a central spiral staircase connecting each layer. The depths, the deal, and the mantle. Giant wall slits allowed shafts of natural light to brighten the many smaller staircases that crisscrossed between the levels, used mainly by the city's unending supply of craftsmen and traders. Stone, softened by the battering of wind, was in ample supply in the valley below, and the forest that hugged the mountain slopes provided wood that grew. Compared to Igni and Yundis, Valewind was young, built atop the ruins of a much larger and older city. Wall carvings and faded murals half buried in the mountainside depicted scenes that Cal had no names for, in a language that he couldn't read, that no one could read, as far as he was aware. The airship had docked in the deal. The staircase leading from the dockyard opened out into a market that should have been filled with business and trade. Instead, vacant stalls sat silent before squat buildings no taller than 2 stories high. No sign of occupancy in any of them. Some even bearing the remains of eviction notices and accusations of rebellion splattered in white paint. The midday sun cast an eerie light over the square. It glinted off the armor of the prefect patrols that stomped through the square as they eyed citizen stragglers with suspicion. Groups of people had been lined up against walls, their hands behind their heads, while prefects and inquisitors either questioned or accused them of colluding with known rebels. Children cried, clumped around the legs of protective adults, or draped over the still bodies of their parents. An inquisitor stood before a group of trembling citizens, marching back and forth with his chin tilted up in a display of disgust. Citizens are warned not to besmirch the great name of the Davan Empire. Any evidence of conspiring with the rebellion However slight, shall be taken as proof of fact. Such a crime is punishable by imprisonment. Any who resist shall be met with lethal force. What happened here? Cal asked, his throat tightening with every breath. He was unable to tear his eyes away from every group they passed. You did, Quentin replied. Cal looked at Quentin in a mix of anger and shock. Valewood has always been a harsh city, he continued, and now that you have broken a second chain, the Empire fears what you will do with the third. He glanced up toward Valewind's chain. It speared the city at an odd angle before plunging into the valley below. Barkus had once talked about the folly of the Valewind cell, how they'd attempted to destroy the point where the chain met the valley, seemingly emboldened by the actions of a young Igni orphan. The attempt had ended in a massacre and triggered a state of constant martial law, effectively ending the Valen rebellion. Valewind was supposed to be a port of safety for Cal and the others. It was never the intention to stick around, but at least they could have gotten their bearings before making the next decision. Now, with the city on full lockdown, just getting from one side to the other seemed an impossible task. Cal's attention snapped to a group of citizens that had been pushed up against the wall by prefects. One such citizen bolted as soon as the opportunity presented itself, wailing in fear as he ran on clumsy footsteps. The presiding inquisitor regarded the man for a second and then signaled to two rooftop prefects. Their brands glowed before their gift transferred into the barrels of their gift arms. With a loud crack, the prefects unleashed two red-hot blasts that threw the runner to the floor, a pained gulp the only sound he made before lying motionless on the stone. Thin wisps of smoke rose from two black holes in his back. We need to get out of here, Shay whispered, urging the others to tear their gazes away from the scene. How much further to the hideout? Quentin asked. It's not far, Shay added, an unsure expression on her face. It's been a while since I came to the city, but I think I can. You, citizens, the Inquisitor called, pointing his finger in the direction of Cal and the others. What business do you have on these streets? Everyone but Cal froze. In a flash, he drew the blade shard and dagger and pushed into the backs of his companions. Run! With Shay at the lead, they plunged into the narrow alleyways that sprawled out from the main market square. Sharp corners and connecting passages made Valewind streets a maze. Cal soon lost his bearings, trusting Shay's lead while they took corners at speed. His constant checking over his shoulder slowed him down somewhat, but it at least informed him that the pursuing Inquisitors had picked up a second group of prefects, smaller than the first. Cal's heart sank as he rounded the final corner and came face to face with a dead end. A 12-foot wall lined stood climbable, but it would take longer than others. Jovette toward the wall. Quentin, help her! Cal didn't expect Quentin to obey, but he did. His hands boosted Ovette up, and she scrambled unsteadily up the wall. Get down on the ground, now! The group's pursuers advanced around the corner, their swords raised and brands glowing. I said get down! The Inquisitor at the head of the group barked. Cal backed toward the wall, fingers tight around his weapons. Shay stood by his side, drawing her dagger and summoning a shadowy twin in her other hand. Perhaps we ought to do as they say, Quentin suggested, resting his hand on Cal's shoulder. Pain rocked through Cal's body, and he collapsed to one knee. His head thumped with noise. A buzzing sound rose to a squeal so loud it made it difficult to see. The blade shard fell from his grip and hit the floor with a dull clang. Enough of this. Seize them. No, wait. Shay stepped in front of the group, dropping her dagger in the illusion. I'm the daughter of Barcus Aurelian, the leader of the Yundis Rebellion. Let them go, and I'll come quietly. Her words poured out of her, as if racing the Inquisitor's growing fury. The Inquisitor regarded Shay for a moment, and then threw his head back in laughter. A mirthless laugh of absolute control that sent a shiver down Cal's spine. Cal strained to look up at Shay. The buzzing between his ears intensified as the Inquisitor stepped closer and lifted Shay's chin with the tip of his blade. You and your kind deserve nothing more than death, filthy scum. With a flick of his wrist, the blade nicked Shay's cheek. Cal forced himself up despite his body's sudden weight. He was barely able to make out the chuckles from behind the Inquisitor. Dropped into strangled gurgles as the blades from the second prefect plunged into their backs. The Inquisitor spun, his eyes wide with fury as he bellowed curses against this group of apparent traitors. Shay darted forward, jammed her knee into the Inquisitor's spine, and wrenched his head back. The Inquisitor's chest jerked forward with a crunch, and he dropped to the floor, his neck bent at an impossible angle. Without saying a word, the leader of the traitor's prefects removed their helmet. He shook his wash of blonde hair, clumped together with sweat, and tucked the helmet under his side.
Took you long enough. I was beginning to think you weren't coming.
Jord! Shay cried, crossing the gap between them and throwing her arms around him in a strangling hug. Jord chuckled as she squeezed and did her the courtesy of not telling that he was struggling for breath. The other prefects each offered Shay a respectful nod as they too dehelmed. For the first time in far too long, Shay's eyes lit up with genuine joy. Jord's smile faded as his gaze passed to Cal. He rushed forward and dropped to one knee, catching Cal as he stumbled.
Cal, what's wrong?
Ovette placed her hand on Cal's shoulder and whispered something into his ear. Her words felt too far away to be understood, but a soothing warmth followed each word. It trickled through his limbs, and the weight of his body fell away, like taking off drenched clothing. He felt the rough cloth of her coin pouch as she placed it in his hand again. The buzzing in his head dulled to a whisper once more as he ran his thumb over the tattered material. Ovette's voice came in clearer, each one delivered like a dropped pebble in a pond.
Cal?
Jord asked again. Cal shook off the last remnants of dizziness and pushed to his feet. He blinked back at his friend, who stood staring at him with concern painted across his face in broad strokes. Cal averted his gaze, embarrassed that Jord had seen him in such a weakened state. Jord opened his mouth to say something, but his eyes flickered toward Ovette. It took him a second, but recognition soon stole away.
Oh, that, he blurted. You're alive.
His hands gripped her shoulders, his eyes darting between hers. He was real. Hello, Jord, Ovette replied with a hint of joy. Jord pulled her in close, embraced her. Ovette huffed as some of the wind was knocked out of her, but she didn't pull away. Breaking the hug, Jord held her at arm's length again.
If I'd known you were alive, if we thought that, well, we would have come for you.
Ovette removed Jord's hands from her shoulders. It's all right, Jord. She eyed the disguised rebels behind him. Do you have a safe place nearby? I don't think we're safe out in the open.
Of course, Jord replied. It's lucky we found you all.
He trailed off as his eyes fell upon Quentin, who had been staying silent at the back. Animated by the sudden attention, Quentin fell into his usual performative display, stepping forward with his arms wide open in a readied embrace. Jord, I've missed you.
We need to get everyone off the streets.
Jord cut in, turning his attention to Shay. Cal studied the faces of Jord's companions. One of them he'd seen in the Eunice hideout a few times, but the other was a stranger. A sudden pang of worry rooted itself in his chest. Jord, where's Artie? Jord dropped his head.
He's been captured by the Inquisitors.
What?
It's not safe to talk here.
Jord exclaimed.
We can discuss everything once we're back to the hideout. Come on.
The group followed Jord and the disguised rebels down identical alleyways, avoiding prefect patrols. Cal's worry crystallized into a knot as he wondered what had happened to Artie, and if his friend were still alive. An abandoned alehouse that sat far from the main bustle of the marketplace, but still within the confines of the city's middle ring, now served as the desperate refuge for the remnants of the Valewind Rebellion. George shouldered through the hideout's door, startling those inside. Wind whistled through wall gaps, and more than a few of the space's residents tugged at the corner of frayed blankets. Charming, Quentin chattered, eyeing a woman's blanket with envy. How long it will take for this one to be discovered. He ambled over to a table, wiping its dusty surface with a huff before sitting down. The few rebels inside shot wary glances at the newcomers, some staring at Jord, waiting for his explanation. Picking up on the discomfort in the room, he gestured for Shay to step forward, clasping both hands on her shoulders.
Friends, this is Shay Aurelian, Marcus Aurelian's daughter, former leader of the Eunice Cell.
Trickled through the room at the mention of Barkis, and it seemed as though the introduction was enough for everyone to lower their guard. Cal caught Jord's eyes and nodded, grateful that Jord had omitted his and Ovette's names. A disheveled woman dropped her blanket to the floor to clasp Shay's hands. Cal watched, noting the way his companion's jaw tightened, but said nothing. Not missing a beat, Quentin scooped up the discarded blanket and wrapped it around himself, tugging at the stains. Your father was a hero to us, the woman said, her voice soft but firm. The lines that surrounded the woman's eyes deepened along with her smile, and she led Shay over to the seat she'd just been occupying. Many of us here owe him our lives. Shay nodded in response, but her pursed lips betrayed how she really felt. Cal flashed back to their boat conversation, how Barkis had been more of a rebel than a father, and the gaping hole Shay felt she had to fill now that he was gone. The other rebels in the room inclined their heads in respect, yet their expressions were drawn with exhaustion and defeat. The knot in Cal's stomach hadn't abated, and the absence of one particular face among this smattering of newfound allies made it tighten. Jord, Cal said, turning a few heads his way. What happened to Artie? Jord let out a heavy sigh and motioned for Cal to come closer.
A few days ago, the Inquisitors raided another hideout. Artie was there.
Where is he now? Cal's panic quickened his words.
He is being held in the market square, not far from where I found you.
Jord gestured to the two disfigured rebels, one a hunched man with a thick gray beard, the other a younger lad with patchy stubble.
This is all I could muster to free him.
Cal's chest clenched. It didn't take long for him to decide his next course of action. He squeezed Jord's shoulder before addressing Shay. Think you can get us back to the market? Shay met his gaze. Of course. Ready to go when you are. Are you sure you're up for this, Cal? Ovette stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs that had grown in the room. Cal took a second to answer. I'm not going to abandon him. He'd do the same for me. Okay. Then I'm coming with you, Ovette said, just in case. Jord let out a deep, long breath, his shoulders sagging as if a tremendous weight had just been lifted.
It's a relief having you all back. The Inquisitors are getting closer to this hideout every day. I don't know what to do.
Shame flashed through his expression as he dropped his head. It had only been a few days since Cal had seen his friend, but Jord looked older, more ragged than remembered. Shay spoke before Cal had the chance. It's okay. You've done more than enough. Is this the only hideout you have left? Quentin chimed in. Jord closed his eyes, his nostrils flaring.
No. My family has a storehouse near one of the tradesmen's stairwells.
His tone carried little emotion.
The plan was to leave the city and head down into the valley. If we can get to the depths, we should be fine.
Shay scanned the room, her gaze sharp and commanding. Okay, she announced. Once we get Artie, we'll meet at the entrance to the depths stairwell. Everyone agreed? A nod of a chorus of nods followed. Great. Let's get moving, people. Cal breathed deep and threw back his shoulders as he followed Shay through the winding back streets of the deal. His body felt stiff from his most recent bout with the Whispers, but his determination to save Artie pushed through his fear of it happening again. Over the years, Artie had been one of the few people he could call a genuine friend, having treated him like any other giftling. No disgust, no fear, no pity. With George's dwindling forces, Cal had little choice but to do everything in his power to help. Or so he told himself. Voices echoed from every direction as the group snuck forward. Prefects barking orders, citizens whimpering in fear. Not being able to intervene pained Cal. Each ignored plea twisted his gut. He tried to close his heart to their suffering. He tried, and failed. Ovette jerked her head toward every cry for help, wincing at every sign and sound of what Daven Rule was really like. There's nothing we can do for them right now, Cal whispered, trying his best to sound comforting and practical all at once. The rim of tears around her eyes tugged at his heart. He knew she understood, but that didn't make things any easier for either of them. Only Shay seemed to hold her composure, halting their progress on more than one occasion to watch abuses of power with stone-faced calm. But Cal knew otherwise. The slight tug at the corner of her mouth, the way her heel bounced slowly as she squatted down. Her restraint was costing her dearly. Before long, the group reached the edge of the central platform that served as the main space for the deal. It was an enormous circular market with compact stone buildings similar to the ones Cal had seen near the dockyard checkpoint. All circular buildings were well maintained. Several large streets, wide enough for bustling crowds to meander along back and forth, ran off at different points like Balewind's chains speared the market's middle. The stone ceiling and floor built around the chain links as they descended through the city at an angle. Cal breathed deep as he laid his eyes on the pulsing runes of the chain. He readied himself for the onslaught of whispers, but nothing came. Ovette touched his hand, and he shook his head, expressing his lack of discomfort. She nodded, then pointed to her coin pouch at his neck. He pulled it free and held tight, ready. Do you see him? Shay asked, scanning the crowd in front of them. Before them, a sporadic crowd of Valens had amassed around a makeshift gallows, erected in haste if the boxes supporting the sides were any sort of indicator. Atop the gallows stood two inquisitors, one with broad, muscle-coiled arms holding a bloodied greatsword, the other a slight man with long, greasy hair and beady eyes that regarded the crowd with disgust. Both wore similar black leathers, the typical golden spire embroidered rather than emblazoned. The slight inquisitor raised his hand to draw attention, silencing the crowd beneath him.
Good citizens of Valewind, he orated, bear witness to those among you who have thrown their lot in with traitors.
The crowd hung on his every word. Many fidgeted as they stood and listened, the air filled with a fragile tension, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. There he is, Shay exclaimed, pointing at a small group of collared giftlings, Artie kneeling among them. Cal's breath hitched in his state of his friend. The bruise on his face was clear even from a distance, as was the dark red stain that had dried on one side of his shirt. Not a fatal wound, but one that would leave a nasty scar all the same. Shay turned to Cal, looking awkward as she considered the right way to ask her question. Cal, do you hear anything? Any voices? Shame rippled through him as Shay studied his expression. She meant well, and her concern was valid, but the words still cut. He let go of the breath he'd been holding since looking at Artie and answered, I'm fine. I'm in control. Shay nodded, turning her attention back to Artie. We'll need to do this fast. She'd already drawn one of her daggers and coalesced her shadows into the shape of another. Maybe wait until his speech is finished? What about the others? Cal asked. We can't just leave them to the Inquisitors. I know, Cal. I know. Shay bit back. Her brow creased as she shifted through ideas in her head. She wanted to save everyone, that was clear, but the situation was grim. The open square offered little cover. There was no way they could get to Artie without drawing attention to themselves. And with the crowd hanging on every word the slight Inquisitor spoke, any rescue would spark chaos. In situations like these, things could get ugly fast. In Cal's experience, that usually meant one thing. Not everyone was going to make it out alive. Words of calm in his mouth. Her face had gone pale, lips trembling as her gaze locked onto a young woman, wailing as a prefect dragged her up the gallows steps. The woman's torn servant dress hinted at former finery, and she looked familiar, but Cal was facing her. A face he'd seen in passing, maybe? The slight fistful of the woman's hair and held her up before the crowd.
This woman has been found guilty of treason of the highest order. She taints the Uden name with her filth, with her lies.
No, no, I didn't do anything. I served the Lord Inquisitor well, I swear,
she cried. Ovette stood frozen, shock and terror locking her limbs.
Liar!
The Inquisitor struck the woman across the face, sending her sprawling.
Your maledictions are not welcome here. These are good people, loyal people, people who wish to see your kind eradicated from this city. For while your kind lives, they are in peril.
His words heightened. Several of its members stepped forward and raised their fists in anger, screaming,
Traitor, you brought death to her door.
You're the reason she's no longer with us. Lord, see us, protect us from filth like you.
The woman sobbed and clawed at the boot of the slight Inquisitor.
Please, please, I beg you. I served the matriarch. I was her faithful servant. Please.
He grimaced, as if something dirty and tainted were touching his clothing.
And where is your matriarch now?
He kicked the woman away, and a jeer swept through the crowd.
Killed by your rebellion.
He opened his arms to address the crowd.
She claims to have served faithfully, to have been the model citizen, but on her watch, murderers broke into the citadel and cut down your matriarch, slaying her in the very fortress she called home.
The jeers from the crowd intensified. The Inquisitor was riling up this mob into a murderous frenzy. "Cal, go, now!" Shay hissed.
Your judgment has been decided, traitor.
The crowd roared in agreement, and the slight Inquisitor signaled to his broader companion.
Death.
The broad Inquisitor made a point to drag the tip of his greatsword across the wooden platform, sending small splinters into the air as he swung it up over his head. "No!" Ovette screamed and rushed forward. White gift fire erupted from her hands, slamming into the broad Inquisitor. He screamed as the flames melted his armor and bubbled his skin. Silence fell over the square. All eyes turned to Ovette, who had the same white gift fire wreathing her arms. "Clara, run!" she shouted. The crowd scattered as Ovette's fire twisted and leaped toward the slight Inquisitor. He dove off the wooden platform and into the screaming mob. Cal watched in awe as the flames coiled around the wooden platform like a snake. Ovette's face was twisted with anger and effort. He turned to Shay, shouldered by a member of the crowd scared for their life. "Shay, get Artie!" "What are you going to do?" she yelled back. Cal pushed and shoved his way through the crowd as he replied, "What do you think?" Shay sprinted for Artie and the other bound prisoners, while Cal drew his blade shard and charged two prefects advancing behind Ovette. He skewered the first through the back and, with shocking ease, lifted him over his head. The prefect's pained wail died with a wet gurgle as Cal twisted the shard and yanked it free mid-throw. The second prefect drove a shallow cut into Cal's shoulder. The padding in his cloak had absorbed most of the strike, but the wound still stung. It was sensation enough to bring Cal back into the fight. He backed up a few more steps and drew his dagger. His opponent's swing came in wild, one born of desperation rather than practice or discipline. Cal feinted left, then pirouetted to his right, bringing both blade shard and dagger up one after the other in quick succession, just like Shay had done to him several times during their sparring sessions. Her raw speed had always made it difficult for him to counter. His dagger clashed against the prefect's sword, the blades locking at the hilt. Cal braced and took a step back, allowing his opponent to believe they had the upper hand. The prefect's panicked expression hardened into a grimace as, sure enough, he took the bait and pushed forward, bringing the edge of his blade closer to Cal's face. At the Cal twisted his body, stepping to the side as the prefect stumbled past him. In one fluid motion, Cal thrust the blade shard forward, driving the tip between the prefect's helmet and chest plate. Blood fountained onto the shard, and the prefect's shoulders crumpled, his head holding for a moment before falling limp. A pulse of satisfaction warmed Cal. As he stared down at the glowing red pool below his defeated opponent, something urged him to strike again. A shrill cry shocked Cal out of his momentary trance.
No! Get away from me!
Cal jerked his head toward the noise. Ovette was advancing on a terrified Clara, her gift fire gone, the corpse of the slight Inquisitor smoldering next to her.
Clara, it's okay. They can't hurt you anymore. No, you're a monster!
Clara found an ounce of courage and scrambled into the remnants of the fleeing crowd, disappearing from sight. Ovette stood frozen in place, her hands outstretched, eyes staring at where her friend had just been. Cal sheathed his blades and made his way toward her. Movement flickered in the corner of his eye. A figure on the nearby rooftop raising a long rune-carved weapon, taking aim.
Ovette!
He broke into a sprint, crossing the market square in the blink of an eye. His chest and the world fell away as he locked onto her. The steps to the raised platform loomed ahead, and with one final burst of speed, he scaled them in a single leap. He threw himself at Ovette, his hands barely gripping her shoulders before a deafening crack ripped through the air. Heat blossomed between his shoulder blades, a searing rush that geared forward, his legs buckling before he dropped to the hard stone below. The impact hawked up a cup of bright arterial blood. He tried to speak, to say something, but his breath caught in his throat, his chest tightening with a painful pinch, as if the air itself had been forced out of him. The distant cry of a man ended with a bone-cracking thud. Ovette's arms wrapped around him, cradling his head in her lap. She spoke, but her words came through muffled, her voice echoing as though from far away. Shay and Artie's faces swam into view, their features blurry before the edges of his vision faded to black. Oh no, Cal has been shot. Poor Cal, he just cannot catch a break, can he? Whatever will he do about it? I mean, what would you do? Who, who put the bop in the bop shibop shabop? Who put the ram in the ramalama ding dong? Who put the deep in the deep de deep de deep? Who was that man? I'd like to shake his hand. He made my baby with me. Are you all enjoying this tonight? Hopefully you guys are enjoying this reading of Gyfted. Of course, if you've missed any of it, the chapters will be up on youtube.com/@SirArminius after the stream tonight. And hopefully you guys are enjoying as we go through. Um, do you like that Valewind has British accents? I feel like need to have different accents, right? And some of the people in Igni had Irish accents at the beginning, so English accents seemed appropriate for Valewind, as all the people in Valewind have those English. It seems appropriate and a nice way to be able to add additional voices in here without having to just always shift the pitch and timbre of my voice as we go along. I hope you all enjoy. And now it is time. That's right, it is time for 28. Pain brought Cal back to consciousness, a lancing, red-hot agony that shot through him as a hard wooden surface thudded into his back. Something rough yet familiar pressed into his trembling hand, but his fingers refused to close around it. Even this simple effort drained him. More pain as hands, quickened by desperation, tugged and pulled at his bloodied shirt. Damp, musty air kissed his exposed skin, and a chorus of gasps filled the room, a sudden sensory input overwhelming. He arched his back to move, but muffled voices told him to stay still and try to relax. A breath through the darkness surrounding his vision, followed by a voice he recognized, soothing and gentle. Cal, brace yourself. This is going to hurt. He didn't understand the words. His head was too muddled by a discord of whispering, as if each word were trying to hold him back, trying to stop him returning to himself. He forced his focus back into the room, on the bright light around Ovette, a brilliant white glow that spiraled down her arms as she placed her hands on his chest. Then the true pain began. The purifying blaze of Ovette's light raged through every nerve, warring against the chain's corruption that had taken hold. Vigor surged through him, and the whispers responded in kind by swelling into a unified scream. The intent behind the voice was now clear. It wanted him, not to harm him or endanger him. It wanted him.
The voice crescendoed into a deafening roar before vanishing, leaving behind blessed silence. Cal bolted upright, gasping for air. Each new breath burned his lungs as if they had never been used before. His vision blurred and he clenched his fists, willing his body to obey. The world spun in and out of focus, but the light around Ovette anchored him, dimmed as it was. She clutched at her temple, wincing as she slumped against the table, exhaustion stealing the color from her face, her white hair clinging to her skin, damp with sweat. Shay didn't wait for permission. Before Cal could say anything, her arms were around him, squeezing so tight it hurt. He returned the embrace as well as he could, drawing her in close, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. The connection grounded him in the moment, brought him back as much as Ovette's gift had, and for a few heartbeats more, he allowed both of them this moment of vulnerability. Her grip tightened before she broke off and punched him in the arm. "You idiot! What were you thinking?" Cal adjusted himself on the table, coughing against the dryness in his throat. His chest still ached, but the tightness was receding. Me? Thinking? The sound of his voice rattled inside his head. It felt strange, but it was his. His alone. Shay let out a soft snort in response and crossed her arms. "How do you feel?" She ran her gaze over Cal, and if it were anyone else, he might have felt embarrassed to be scrutinized in such a manner. Cal breathed deep, flexed his blackened hand, and rotated his shoulder, taking stock of how light both felt. A bit drained, to be honest. But I feel good. Better than I've felt in years. George stepped forward, his head bent low to one side as he too inspected Cal's body. "Cal, your arm, your chest." Cal pulled the tattered remnants of his clothing together, aware of the room staring at his exposed chest. "It's nothing, really. I'm just. I'm still figuring it out. Don't worry, I have it under control." Jord wasn't convinced. He leaned closer and kept his voice low. "Are you sure? How can you have something under control if you don't know what it is?" His question was as solid and practical as ever. Shay inserted herself between them both. "Artie and Cal are safe. Right now, that's all." She turned to the pale and sweating Ovette. "Ovette, I don't know what you did, and I have even less idea how you did it. But thank you." Ovette ignored her thanks, her stern gaze having never left Cal. "Are you ready to leave?" The gravity of her question dawned on him. He swung his legs over the table, testing his weight before buttoning his leather jerkin over the torn undershirt. "I'm ready." "Leave? But you're still weak," Jord remarked, trying his best to push the resisting Cal back onto the table. "Where exactly do you both intend on going? Will you at least explain what you two are talking about?" "The Inquisitors will make their move soon. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they were already on their way here." Ovette's words were clipped, sending a round of gasps around the room. George's face drew pale, and he stepped toward her, a hint of frustration in his voice.
"There's no way you could know that for sure. And frightening these people isn't going to help right now."
Cal finished adjusting his clothing and hopped off the table. "The Inquisitors will know where Ovette is, because she used her abilities to save me." Ovette dipped her head as Cal spoke. "You all saw it, the white fire in her palms. I don't know how, but that fire is like a beacon to the great chain in Sanctum Spire, and it'll be sending its enforcers to come and collect her. If she stays here, she puts all of you in danger." Cal turned away from the crowd and faced Ovette. "And wherever she goes, I go." What little color Jord had left in his face drained, giving way to the exhaustion of the last few days, the last few weeks. He swayed on his feet.
Is that true?
Anyone who could answer. It is, Oved answered. The chains are more alive than you realize, more than anyone realizes.
Where will you go?
Artie stepped forward, a spot of blood seeping through the fresh bandage placed around his head. Till now, he'd been content with staying hidden among the others in the room, but it was obvious he felt responsible for all this. He wore the shame openly. Cal could almost see that shame turning over in his friend's rational mind. If he hadn't been captured, Cal wouldn't have had to save him, wouldn't have been injured, and Ovette wouldn't have had to use her gift. Cal felt a twinge of sorrow for his friend. Shay, true to her cunning, answered for them. They're going to break Veilwind's chain. She caught Cal's hesitant gaze and pinned it down like a spider would a fly. Aren't you?
That's madness, George spat. The Citadel sits on the outer edge of the mantle. There's no way either of you could even get close to its gates, let alone storm its halls and destroy the chain.
I know it sounds insane, but we have to try, Jord. Ovette and I can't stay here. Now that the Inquisitors know the Gyfted, they're going to care a lot more finding us than they do you. Cal gestured to the disparate rebels huddled around the room, all of them listening intently. The longer we stay, the more danger we put you in.
We're in danger with or without you here,
Artie chimed in. Shay moved with sudden purpose, breaking the silence that had fallen on the room. She gathered what little supplies the rebels had been able to cobble together and threw them into a small hip satchel. If we're heading to the Citadel, we might as well go now. The intensity of her words were almost palpable. Cal caught her arm. No, Shay. Not we. Not this time. He gestured again to the people in the room. These people need you more than I do. They need their leader. She shook him off. You're right. They need their leader. But that's not me. It's him, she said, pointing at Jord. I'm not my father, and I don't want to be either. I can't encourage people the way he could. But Jord can. She held up her hand before Cal could respond, her voice turning to steel. I know what you're going to say, but I don't want to hear it. Don't try to talk me out of this. You may be the chain breaker, and she may be the gifted, but that doesn't give you the right to tell me to run and hide while you both throw your lives away. Every single person who joined the rebellion did so knowing it could lead to their deaths. We all have our reasons for being here, and don't you dare try to take that away from us. From me. This fight is about more than just the two of you. Her words hung in the air, strong and resolute. Cal studied the room, stared into the faces of the able few willing to stand against tyranny. The graybeard veteran with his aging leather armor, a merchant's daughter who held her dagger at the wrong angle, the patch-bearded lad already belting his one-size-too-big sword. Their eyes bore the same determined glint as Shay's. Allies by common cause, strangers in name only. Resigned to Shay's decision, Cal exhaled through his nose. Okay. We'll make our way to the mantle first. Figure things out from there. Jord rubbed his stubbled chin, the rasp loud in the quiet room.
Finding the citadel will be easy enough. It's the tallest building on the mantle. Valewind's government uses it as its seat of power. But we'll never get close. Not with every prefect in the city for you. Why don't we use those?
Artie pointed to the prefect uniforms piled in the corner.
The Inquisitors are looking for Cal and Ovette, right? So why don't we give them exactly what they're looking for?
We can walk right through the fence. Cal's eyebrows rose. Not bad, Artie. Artie shrugged his shoulders and gestured to Quentin behind him.
Actually, it was his idea.
Quentin tipped his head in silence, eyeing the group.
That gets you inside the building, but what about the prefects inside? The city is on high alert, remember? There'll be dozens of them inside. Plus, you still have to make it to the chain room and sever the damned thing,
George said. The gray-bearded rebel cleared his throat and stepped forward.
We can take care of that.
How? Shay asked.
If we hit the town hall at the same time, it'll draw out the prefects and the inquisitors. Should empty the citadel somewhat.
George swooped his arm in front of him, dismissing the idea.
No, we've discussed this already. Hitting the town hall is suicide.
Why the town hall? What's there? Cal asked, looking between George and the rebel.
It's been converted into a makeshift processing center. It's where the Inquisitors have been taking the citizens they've rounded up. Anyone strong enough to be sent to the labor camps in the valley. Some of our people are being held there, and they're long overdue for a rescue,
the rebel answered.
I said no.
George's frustration frayed his voice. Are you sure? Shay asked the aging rebel, ignoring George's protest.
My son is there.
The man's voice never wavered, though his knuckles whitened on the hilt of his sword.
I've never been more sure.
Thank you. Shay clasped the man's shoulder before addressing the room. It's decided then. George, Artie, Quentin, and I will don the prefect uniforms and take Cal and Ovette to the citadel as captives. The rest of you hit the town hall with everything you've got. Her gaze landed on Artie. Outfit the town hall team with whatever gadgets you can spare. Anything that might give them an edge.
On it,
Artie replied, and he led the aging rebel to a pile of what looked like metal casings and scrap. The rest of you, if there's anything you can't bear to leave behind, now's the time to grab it. We leave within the hour. At Shay's word, the rebels sprang into action, checking weapons, sharing quiet words. The room came abuzz with life. George nudged Cal and gestured his head toward Shay, the corner of his mouth playing into a smirk.
What was she saying about not being their leader?
Cal shivered as he and the others crept through the streets leading to Valewind's citadel, the late afternoon air biting through his clothes. Valewind wasn't known for its clement weather, and the mantle's exposed position offered less protection from the wind-driven damp. It was enough to sap the morale of any would-be insurgents. The group stopped just a short distance from the citadel gate. Its walls shot up in the same looming arrogance as the others Cal had sundered, the chain's runes pulsing where it pierced the roof. A small army of prefects and inquisitors crewed the citadel's gatehouse, far more than Cal or even Ovette could handle at once. The guard stood rigid beneath a newer archway, made of the same matte gray stone as Dredge's gift-dampening collars. The construction looked fresh, an unmistakable sign of the Daven's grip tightening on the populace. Every detail confirmed the citadel's high alert. Dread slithered through Cal's gut. He should have been grateful for the continued silence in his mind. Ovette's gift had healed him, leaving him in better condition than he had been in years. all his persistent aches and old injuries gone. But he couldn't shake the sense that the whispers were lurking rather than gone.
What's taking them so long?
Quentin slumped against the wall of the alley that the group had decided to hide in, his casual posture at odds with the danger and severity of the situation.
They should have hit the town hall by now.
Jord gave Quentin the barest of side glances.
He's right. Something must have happened to them.
Neither of them had spoken much since they'd reunited. Give them a chance. Cal placed a hand on Jord's shoulder. They're a brave group for risking their lives like this.
They're just trying to keep up with the Chainbreaker, Jord said. Even here in Valewind, people have heard of you.
I can think of a few better role models. Cal gave Jord a wry smile.
Funny. So can I,
Jord said, returning the smile. The ground shook as an explosion rocked the nearby streets, spraying the rooftops with debris. A column of dark gray smoke began to billow into the air. The Citadel gate became alive with activity. Inquisitors barked orders, and prefect units mobilized toward the disturbance, leaving behind only a skeleton crew to guard the main gate.
Time to move,
Jord said, reaching for his prefect helmet. Wait. Cal stopped him and the rest from readying themselves. He cast one last glance at the gate, his unease lingering. We need to make sure we get this right. If we're found out, we'll be surrounded before we can make our escape. What exactly do you have in mind? Shay asked. Cal mulled over different options in his mind before turning to look between Ovette and the group. Ovette, you need to pretend to be unconscious. After your display in the market square, no one would believe a group of prefects overpowered you if you were awake. Ovette dipped her head. The words were true, but discomfort still flashed across her features. Cal made a mental note to apologize for it later. Artie, Quentin, you carry in Ovette. Shay, you can lead me in while Jord does the talking. Everyone nodded and then fixed their disguises. Cal turned his attention to Jord, once again giving his shoulder a squeeze. There's one more thing I need from you. Same with Ovette. We need to make it look like I went down fighting. He composed himself before saying, Jord, I need you to punch me in the face. Hard. Jord's eyes shot wide.
What? Have you gone mad? I'm not going to do that.
Cal smirked. Why not? You used to do it all the time. Jord averted his gaze, his cheeks flushing red.
That was a long time ago, Cal. We were different people.
Cal's rivalry with Jord felt like something from another life, like it had happened to different people. One born into wealth and power, the other born without. Life had twisted them both down strange paths, but standing here, now, in an alleyway watching their hated enemy scramble to face yet another rebel attack, Cal couldn't have been more grateful for his friendship. Jord's voice dropped, and when he looked back at Cal, the redness in his cheeks hadn't faded.
I've never really apologized for the way I used to treat you. Nor you, Ovette.
Ovette took his hand in her own. You've nothing to apologize, Jord. I'm glad we all had this opportunity to reunite. We're all that's left of our family. Jord swallowed hard. Ovette smiled, lifting his chin. Besides, Cal probably deserved some of it. Jord managed a grateful smile back before Cal jabbed his shoulder. Make it look believable, for old time's sake. Jord inhaled and rolled back his shoulders.
As you wish.
His slight smile morphed into a grin.
King Hollow.
And that was 28. All right, guys, we've got one more chapter we're going to do tonight. One more. Because one more seems appropriate. I hope you guys are enjoying, as a reminder, if you happen to be on any of the channels and you haven't done so already, do me a favor and subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SirArminius. Helps me to continue to support our indie authors out there with these readings. And if you've missed any of the chapters all the way from the beginning, the prologue, all the way up through any of them tonight, you can catch all of them at the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SirArminius. I have a playlist titled Gyfted. Or you can just find the individual chapters, whatever makes you happy. 'Cause if it makes you happy, it can't be that bad. And now we're going to get into what will likely be our final chapter of the night. But there's a chance that if it's really short, we might get one more. But let's dive into 29. The Citadel's inner hall matched its exterior in both palette and design. Muted gray walls and a welcome area that was all sharp edges and pristine white. The brutal architecture gave the space a utilitarian chill, as though this were a place of cold logic and rational thought. Not even the blocky furniture offered any semblance of warmth or comfort. Cal rotated a click out of his jaw and nursed the right side edge of his chin. Jord had put on a convincing show, and he almost regretted asking his friend to relive their adolescent rivalry. Jord winked at him as Cal leaned against what he took to be a chamberlain's desk, a long, hard, whitewashed wooden counter beside chairs of matching material with backs too tall for any normal person. He scanned the others as they entered the space. Artie checked and rechecked the contents of a satchel he wore at his hip. Shay ran her fingers across the pommel of her dagger. Jord took in the room around him with meticulous detail, sighing each time the beginnings of an idea fell through. Each of them was trying to hide their nervousness in some way. Ovette and Quentin, however, seemed unfazed, their gazes fixed ahead on the lone corridor that led deeper into the heart of the Citadel. Ovette strained herself, as if listening for the slightest change in something. Cal surmised she sensed the gift swirling around, or perhaps Veilwind's chain. The limited sentience Ovette had said the chains possessed might be talking to her, or perhaps listening for her. Either way, if Ovette could sense it, then Cal was certain it could sense her back. Come to think of it, shouldn't he be able to feel something too? Cal reached out with his senses, not entirely sure what he was doing or even what he expected to feel. The whispers in his head, the soft buzzing that had haunted him since Igni, had ceased. Ovette using her gift on him had silenced them, and now here, close to another chain, their absence was like a hole had been bored into his skull. It had become an empty void that his thoughts and feelings had to swim around. He closed his eyes and turned his senses inward. In his mind's eye, he saw himself standing at the edge of a precipice, peering down into its dark depths. The urge to jump in was strong, to allow himself to be swallowed by whatever lurked in the shadows of his fractured mind. He knew one thing for sure. The presence that resided at the bottom of this pit might be silent, but it wasn't gone.
Where is everyone?
Artie's voice pulled Cal back from the edge. He blinked and turned his gaze around to the entrance hall, only now coming to the realization that he and his group were alone.
Well, the plan was for the distraction outside to pull as many people out of the Citadel as possible.
Jord answered, edging his way toward the corridor.
Perhaps. For once, luck is on our side.
Keep your guard up, Shay said, moving past Jord and being the first in the group to start making their way out of the entrance hall. We don't know what's waiting. Cal waited behind to bring up the rear. As he took his first step into the long gray-white corridor, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. A momentary urge to flee overwhelmed him. He spun on the spot, trying in vain to get a sense of where this feeling had come from. A thump hit him in the back, knocking the wind out of him. He doubled over, gasping for his next breath, the echo of a piercing ring fading from his mind.
Cal?
He straightened and spun to face Artie and the rest of the group. His eyes widened at the sight of his surroundings. The emotionless decor of the entrance hall had been replaced by towering shelves that stretched across the back wall of a small office. Each of the shelves' cubbyholes packed with books and scrolls. Sturdy metallic desks ran the length of the office in precise rows, each stacked with neat paper piles, all in the same uniform gray-white as the rest of the Citadel.
Cal, are you feeling okay?
Artie cocked his eyebrow as he looked at Cal, his expression creasing his features. Cal started to answer, but the thumping sensation returned, this time a gentle pounding behind his eyes. His vision blurred, and the room began to swim around him. He rubbed his hands against his eyes, blinking his vision back into focus. Panic stabbed at his temples. One moment the office, and his friends along with it, had been there, and in the next, it was gone. The world had shifted, leaving him standing alone in the center of a giant pit. His gaze tracked the pit's void black conical walls before tilting back to take in their height. The walls ended at a disk of light, distant and cold. A figure, too obscured by distance and shadow, stood at the edge, staring down. He tried to scream, to force any sound and let the figure know he needed help, but his mouth stayed silent. Straining his throat made no difference. He darted to the nearest wall and slammed his fist against it, hoping to make some kind of echo. None came. Pain blazed through his hand as his fist impacted the wall again, again, again. The figure pulled back from the edge, and Cal sank to the floor. The emptiness of this void pushed down on him as his mind raced for a way out. Climbing, fighting, anything to escape. His hands pawed at his hip, where his blades should have been. Nothing. Panic clamped around him like a vice, choking him for a breath. Then, as unexplained as the space itself, a single high-pitched snap of metal on metal rang through the darkness. Cal pressed his back to the wall and pushed himself to stand. The metallic snap sounded again, and then again, louder this time. He leaned forward, head cocked, eyes straining against the shadows. Without warning, the pit erupted with noise. The snapping crescendoed around him, grinding and banging against the walls, getting louder and louder, closer and closer. A change sprang from the darkness ahead, and Cal threw his arms in front of his face in reflex, just as a voice rang through the darkness. Cal! Cal's senses roared to life. He squeezed his eyes shut against the blinding light of the corridor and clamped his hands over his ears. The arguing voices of his companions coming to him all at once. With effort, he opened his eyes to see Ovette right in front of him, staring at him with a grave look of concern. "Are you here?" she asked, her eyes flickering between his. "Talk to me."
Yeah,
he replied, shaking his head slightly as if to try and clear the fog.
I was in a pit. And then...
His words trailed off as he noticed the others behind her. Shay and Artie were locked in an argument with an animated Jord, and Quentin was nowhere to be seen.
We're lost, George said, his agitation thickening every word. We've been lost for hours. Quentin is gone, and we're no closer to that blasted chain room.
Shouting at us isn't going to change that, Shay replied, her one arm held in front of Artie. The artificial lighting that illuminated the halls made it impossible to tell what time of day it was, or even gauge how long the group had been in the Citadel. To Cal, it felt like the group had only just arrived, but Jord had mentioned wandering for hours. His thoughts drifted back to the pit and the chain that had shot out from the darkness. The thumping sensation returned. It reverberated through the walls, emanating from deeper within the Citadel. Cal scanned the identical corridors, unable to discern any real difference from one direction to another. The thumps came again, clearer, like a distant heartbeat pulsing in the dark. He stared into the darkness of the featureless corridor to his left. Something was pulling him toward it, calling out to him. "It's this way," he said, his voice monotone as he began walking toward the pulsing, not waiting or checking to see if the others were following him. "What?
Where is he going?"
How can you be certain?" The thump in the air drowned out their voices. Cal wasn't sure how he knew, but his certainty was ironclad. The chain was calling him forward. It wanted him to find it. He followed that call, the pulse in the air intensifying with each step. As he turned a corner, certain the chain was just ahead, Ovette grabbed his wrist and shoved her coin pouch into his hand. "Hey, look at me!" She grabbed the side of his face with her free hand, forcing his eyes to meet hers. "Focus on this when the voices get too loud, okay?" Her grim expression left no room for debate. Cal nodded in reply and stepped toward a doorway, feeling the source of the pulse within. Cold, gray-white walls and a cavernous ceiling yawned before him. Veilwind's chain passed through the ceiling and floor at an angle, and a raised platform had been crafted to meet one of its enormous links. Runes inscribed into the metal thumped in concert with the call Cal had felt, confirming what he already knew to be true. The chain wanted him in this room. The pit and the lancing chain flashed in his mind, accompanied by the slightest itch. His fingers closed around Ovette's coin pouch. The feeling of the rough material anchored him. The reminder of who it belonged to lightened the weight in his limbs. Cal held his breath as he stared at the chain. And it stared back. He wondered to himself if the chain could feel. He'd come here to sever it, to kill it before it killed him. So shouldn't it be afraid? Feel some kind of anticipation? Resistance? On the contrary, the chain emanated a sense of calm. It fixed its gaze on Ovette and him, dismissing the others as beneath its notice. One by one, the rest of the group filed into the room, them checking corners and shadows for any sign of ambush or enemy in waiting. Wasting little time, Ovette moved toward the raised platform, her stride confident and sure, cutting through the tension. "Cal, are you ready? We do this together." The chain sent out a thick pulse in reply. It knew what they were about to do, but this pulse wasn't a form of defense, nor a plea for mercy. It was a signal. But a signal for whom? "Cal, are you with me?" Ovette pressed. Cal wrenched his focus back into the present moment. The more he thought of the chain, the more he felt like he was staring into that deep pit again. He stepped beside Ovette and drew the blade shard. "Let's do this quickly." Ovette nodded and moved closer to the chain, her arms raised too. A whistle, sharp and deliberate, ripped through the room. Cal spun around. his eyes locking on the form of a grinning Quentin. He had Artie pinned from behind, a dagger glinting across his throat.
I wouldn't do that just yet, my dear, he sneered. Chainbreaker, Gyfted, if you would be so kind as to step back.
Cal took a step toward him, a murderous snarl curling his lip. But Quentin pulled back on Artie's arm, pressing the edge of the dagger into his throat deep enough to draw a tiny rivulet of blood.
Do as I say and no one gets hurt. Well, no one important anyway.
But, Shay yelled, what are you doing?
My job,
Quentin smirked, not taking his eyes off of Cal or his blade off Artie's throat. 3 Inquisitors stepped through the doorway into the room, all with pallid skin and thick, sickly green sludge seeping from their eyes and corners of their mouths. The stench of death rolled off of them in waves, and their armor bulged at weird angles, warped by something festering beneath.
Well done, Quentin.
A 4th figure followed the Inquisitors into the chamber, his gray hair swept back, his armor enhanced not by design, but by the general imperiousness of his demeanor. His gaze locked onto Cal. The Lord Inquisitor.
We meet at last, Callus.
And that is the end of chapter 29. And by the fact that I can't stop coughing as I go through here, I think we're going to stop here for the night. And it's a great place to stop for the evening, I think. So, once again, all of the chapters from tonight and all of the chapters leading up to here will be available on the YouTube channel right after I end the stream. I'm going to start uploading them, so look for them to be there for you. Thank you all so much for joining me this evening. The greatest gift that you can give me is the gift of your time. And I appreciate that you guys gave me the gift of yours this evening, whether it was for 5 minutes or for 2.5 hours. Thank you so much for being here with me. Hope you've enjoyed this reading of Gyfted. Please, if you have, make sure that you've subscribed to the channel, share it with your friends. Help to support this wonderful debut indie author, D.W. Lewis. You know you want to, you know you need to, you know it's great to do. Thank you. I will be back again Tuesday and we'll continue from chapter 30 onward. I don't think we'll make it to the end. I think we've got probably at least 2 more sessions tonight or Tuesday and probably next Saturday. But we'll see how it goes from here. Who knows? Could be longer than that. Hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will look forward to seeing you guys all again soon. Have a great night, everybody.